I exposed my wife's cheating-powered humiliation routine with a ruthless reunion trap, served divorce papers, and walked away to reclaim my life. You know that moment when you realize your wife doesn't just lack a filter, she weaponizes her mouth like it's her personal entertainment system? Well, let me tell you about the night I discovered exactly how small my patience had become. It started during what should have been a simple dinner with her college friends. We're sitting at this upscale restaurant, everyone's having a good time, when somehow the conversation shifts to relationships and intimacy. Normal couples might share a knowing glance or deflect with humor. Not my wife. She decides this is the perfect moment for her favorite party trick. "Oh, girls, you should see what I have to work with at home," she says with this theatrical sigh, holding up her pinky finger and wiggling it around. "Let's just say I've seen baby carrots with more impressive dimensions." The table goes silent for about 2 seconds, before erupting in laughter. Her friends are cackling like hyenas, and I'm sitting there watching my wife perform her little comedy routine at my expense. Again, this wasn't new territory for her. She had this thing about making jokes about our intimate life, specifically about my anatomy, and she'd do it anywhere, anytime, with anyone listening, family dinners, work parties, casual hangouts with neighbors. It was like she collected these moments of humiliation and stored them up for maximum impact. "Come on, it's just a joke," she'd always say afterward. Usually while I'm still processing the fact that my own wife just announced my personal business to her book club, or whoever happened to be within earshot that day. But that night at the restaurant, watching her friends practically falling out of their chairs laughing while she continued her performance, something clicked. She wasn't just making jokes. She was systematically destroying my dignity, piece by piece, audience by audience. "You know what they say about men with big trucks," she continued, really warming up now. "Well, my husband drives a sedan, so you can imagine how that math works out." More laughter, more humiliation, more of my wife treating our marriage like her personal comedy club where I'm the permanent punchline. I sat there for the rest of dinner, nodding and smiling while she continued her routine. But inside, I was calculating, not just the number of times she'd done this, but the systematic way she'd been chipping away at my self-respect for months, years, actually. When we got home that night, she was still giggling about her performance. She kicked off her heels and flopped onto the couch like she'd just returned from a successful night at the comedy club. "The girls love that story about your little situation," she said, not even looking at me. "I should write material for stand-up comedians." That's when it hit me. She wasn't going to stop. This wasn't a phase or a bad habit she'd grow out of. This was who she was, and she genuinely believed that humiliating me in public was not just acceptable, but entertaining. I stood there watching her scroll through her phone, probably texting those same friends about more intimate details she could share next time, and I made a decision. This marriage was over, done, finished. But here's the thing about being systematically humiliated by someone who's supposed to love and respect you. You don't just walk away quietly. You don't just pack your bags and disappear into the night like some defeated victim. No. Sometimes you need to show someone exactly what it feels like to be on the receiving end of their cruelty. Sometimes you need to give them a taste of their own medicine, served at the perfect temperature for maximum impact. As I watched her there on that couch, completely oblivious to the fact that she just destroyed the last thread of respect I had for her, I started planning. Not just my exit strategy, but something much more poetic. She was about to learn that humiliation is a two-way street, and I was about to give her the most educational experience of her life, the kind of lesson that would make her think twice before she ever decided to use someone's intimate life as material for her sick entertainment again. I went to bed that night with a plan forming in my mind. She wanted to play games with people's dignity? Fine, game on. The next morning, I woke up with the clarity that only comes from having your breaking point served to you on a silver platter. While she slept in, probably dreaming about her next public humiliation performance, I was already 3 steps ahead. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and started doing what any good strategist does, research. See, my wife had this habit of oversharing. And over the years, she'd told me plenty about her awkward teenage years, the acne problems that lasted until college, the time she wet herself during a school presentation in 10th grade, how she used to stuff her bra with tissues, and got caught when they fell out during gym class. The nickname the popular kids gave her that made her cry for weeks. She'd shared these stories during our dating phase, probably thinking it made her seem vulnerable and relatable. What she didn't realize was that she was giving me a complete blueprint of every insecurity she'd ever had. I pulled out my laptop and started making lists. Not just of her old insecurities, but of her high school friends I could track down. Social media made this embarrassingly easy. Within 2 hours, I had contact information for 6 of her closest friends from back then. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would throw her a surprise party, a reunion with her old high school crowd, disguised as a romantic gesture celebrating our relationship. She'd think I was being the devoted husband, going above and beyond to make her happy. What she wouldn't know was that this party would be carefully orchestrated to remind her of every single moment of embarrassment and insecurity from her past. Every joke, every humiliation, every moment when she felt small and powerless. I started with the invitations. I reached out to her old friends with this whole story about wanting to surprise my wife with a nostalgic reunion, how much our relationship meant to me, how I wanted to celebrate our love by bringing together the people who knew her best during her formative years. They ate it up. Every single one of them thought it was the sweetest thing they'd ever heard. While I was coordinating with her friends, I was also playing the part of the devoted husband at home. I brought her flowers that week, complimented her cooking, asked about her day with genuine interest. She was practically glowing from all the attention, completely oblivious to what was coming. "You've been so sweet lately," she said one evening, snuggling up to me on the couch. "It's like we're newlyweds again." I smiled and kissed her forehead. Just appreciating what I have. If she only knew. The research phase was the most important part. I spent hours going through old yearbooks I found in her closet, reading every inscription, studying every photo. I memorized the names of the popular kids who used to tease her. I found the exact brand of acne medication she used to hide in her locker. I even tracked down the specific song that was playing when she had her most embarrassing moment at prom. Every detail mattered because this wasn't going to be some obvious revenge plot. This was going to be subtle, psychological, devastating. She was going to feel every emotion she'd put me through, but she wasn't going to understand why until it was too late. I booked the community center where they used to have school dances. I ordered decorations that matched their graduation year theme. I even found a DJ who could play all the songs from their high school era, with special emphasis on the tracks that would trigger specific memories. The food was crucial too. I remembered her telling me how self-conscious she used to be about eating in public because of her weight issues back then, so I made sure to order all the foods that reminded her of school cafeteria lunches. The same brands, the same presentations, everything designed to transport her back to feeling like that insecure teenager. But the masterstroke was the games. I planned activities that would naturally lead to conversations about high school memories. Truth or dare, remember when, guess who this yearbook quote belongs to. All innocent fun that would inevitably circle back to the moments she'd rather forget. 2 weeks of preparation. 2 weeks of playing the loving husband while carefully constructing her psychological takedown. She had no idea that every kiss, every compliment, every romantic gesture was just part of setting the stage for her education. The night before the party, she was practically bouncing with excitement. She'd spent hours getting ready, buying a new dress, doing her hair and makeup like she was going to prom all over again. "I can't believe you did all this for me," she said, looking at herself in the mirror. "This is going to be the best night ever." I stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, looking at our reflection. "Oh, it's definitely going to be a night you'll never forget." She had no idea how right I was. The party started exactly as I planned. Picture-perfect reunion vibes with just the right touch of nostalgia in the air. The community center looked like a time capsule from their graduation year, complete with the cheesy decorations and that specific smell of institutional carpeting that screams high school memories. Her friends started arriving around 7, and the squealing and hugging began immediately. These women hadn't seen each other in years, and the excitement was genuine. My wife was absolutely radiant, floating around the room like she was the star of her own movie. "I cannot believe you pulled this off," she kept saying to me, grabbing my arm every few minutes. "This is incredible. You're incredible." I played my part perfectly, the devoted husband who just wanted to make his wife happy. I made sure everyone had drinks, introduced myself to the friends I hadn't met, and generally acted like the supportive spouse who was just thrilled to facilitate this magical reunion. But I was also watching, calculating, waiting for the right moments to begin phase 2. The first hour was all surface-level catch-up. Who's married, who has kids, who moved where, the standard reunion small talk. I let them settle into their comfort zone, let the wine flow, let the defenses come down naturally. Then I started introducing the carefully planned elements. Hey, remember this song? I called out to the DJ, who immediately switched to the track that was playing during her infamous prom disaster. The one where she tripped, walking up to receive some minor award and face-planted in front of the entire school. The song triggered exactly the reaction I was hoping for. A few of the women started laughing and pointing at each other. "Oh my God, prom!" One of her friends laughed. "That was such a disaster for all of us." "Speak for yourself," another one chimed in. "Some of us managed to stay upright the entire night." My wife laughed along, but I caught the slight tightness around her eyes. The first crack in the facade. Next came the decorations. I'd positioned the photo displays strategically around the room, mixed in with current pictures of everyone, but scattered throughout were yearbook photos from their most awkward phases. Her friends were cooing over how cute they all looked, but I made sure the most unflattering shots of my wife were prominently featured. The ones from her heavy phase junior year, the school picture where her acne medication had dried out her skin so badly she looked like she had a rash. The candid shot from the school newspaper where she was mid-sneeze and looked absolutely ridiculous. "Oh, honey, look at this one," I said loudly, pointing to the worst photo in the bunch. "You were so adorable back then." Her friends gathered around, and I watched her face as they studied the picture. The forced smile, the way she quickly tried to redirect attention to someone else's photo. "We all had our awkward phases," she said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier enthusiasm. Then came the food reveal. I'd set up a buffet that looked exactly like their old-school cafeteria. Same institutional serving trays, same basic cafeteria food, even the same brand of chocolate milk in those little cartons. "This is hilarious," one friend said. "It's like we're back in the lunchroom." "Remember how self-conscious we all were about eating in front of people?" Another one added, looking directly at my wife. "Especially you. You used to eat your lunch in the bathroom because you were so worried about people watching you." The room went quiet for a beat. My wife's face flushed red. "That was a long time ago," she said quietly. "Oh, come on, we all had our weird phases," I said cheerfully, as if I was just being supportive. "It's cute how much you've grown since then." But the damage was done. Her friends were now looking at her differently, remembering things they'd forgotten. The insecure girl she used to be was starting to eclipse the confident woman she'd become. I kept the momentum going with the activities. The memory games I'd planned were working perfectly. Every question, every prompt seemed to circle back to moments of embarrassment or insecurity from their shared past. "Remember when you got caught stuffing your bra and the tissues fell out during volleyball?" One friend blurted out during a particularly animated story session. My wife's face went white. "Can we please not talk about that?" "Oh, come on, it was funny," another friend said. "The whole gym saw it happen." "It wasn't funny to me," my wife snapped, her composure finally starting to crack. I watched from across the room, sipping my drink and taking mental notes. This was exactly how I felt every time she decided to share intimate details about our relationship for her entertainment. Exposed, vulnerable, powerless to stop the humiliation train once it left the station. The evening was progressing beautifully. My wife was no longer the radiant hostess floating around the room. She was becoming smaller, quieter, more defensive with each passing conversation. Her friends, meanwhile, were getting more animated and less filtered as the alcohol kicked in. They were sharing stories and memories without thinking about how they might affect her, just like she did to me every time she opened her mouth about our private life. By 9 o'clock, she was sitting in a corner, barely participating in the conversation swirling around her. The confident woman who loved being the center of attention had been replaced by the insecure teenager she used to be. And we hadn't even gotten to the main event yet. By 10 o'clock, the atmosphere had shifted completely. What started as a joyful reunion had morphed into something that felt more like a therapy session where everyone was remembering things they'd buried for good reason. I decided it was time to escalate things. "You know what? We should play," I announced to the group, clapping my hands together like an enthusiastic camp counselor. "Truth or dare, just like old times." The suggestion was met with mixed reactions. Some of her friends were immediately on board, already giggling at the possibilities. Others looked hesitant, and my wife looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. "Oh, I don't know," she said quickly. "We're not teenagers anymore." "Come on, it'll be fun," I insisted, my voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "What's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, right?" We arranged the chairs in a circle, and I made sure my wife was positioned where everyone could see her clearly. The spotlight was about to be all hers, just the way she liked it when she was humiliating me. The first few rounds were tame. Safe truths about celebrity crushes and silly dares about dancing or singing. Everyone was laughing and relaxed, except for my wife, who looked like she was sitting on a bed of nails. Then one of her friends, clearly emboldened by the wine, decided to dig deeper. "Okay, truth," she said, pointing directly at my wife. "What was your most embarrassing moment in high school?" The room went silent. My wife's face cycled through about 5 different expressions before settling on panic. "Can I take a dare instead?" "Nope," her friend said with a wicked grin. "You picked truth. Spill it." I leaned back in my chair, watching this unfold like it was premium entertainment, which, let's be honest, it was. My wife squirmed in her seat for a full 30 seconds before finally speaking. "The prom thing. When I fell." "That wasn't your most embarrassing moment," another friend called out. "What about the time you started your period during the senior class presentation and didn't notice until someone pointed out the stain on your white skirt?" The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. My wife's face turned the exact same shade of red as that skirt stain probably was. "Or the time you got food poisoning and threw up all over yourself during the homecoming dance?" someone else added. "Okay, can we please stop?" my wife said, her voice shaking slightly. Her friends were on a roll now, and the floodgates had opened. Story after story poured out, each one more humiliating than the last. The time she got her period unexpectedly during gym class, the day she split her pants bending over to pick up her books, the infamous incident where she called the teacher mom in front of the entire class and couldn't live it down for months. "Remember her nickname?" one friend said, and I could see my wife physically recoil. "Don't," she whispered. "What nickname?" I asked innocently, though I already knew from my research. "They used to call her Leaky because she had that bladder issue," the friend explained, completely oblivious to how devastating this was. My wife stood up abruptly. "I need some air." She headed toward the bathroom, but I wasn't about to let her escape the lesson just yet. "Wait," I called out, walking over to her. "The night's not over yet. I have a surprise for you." She looked at me with eyes that were already filling with tears. "Please, can we just go home?" "But we haven't had cake yet," I said with mock concern, "and I worked so hard to make this night special for you." Her friends were still chattering amongst themselves, sharing more stories and laughing about the good old days. They had no idea they were participants in my carefully orchestrated psychological warfare. I guided my wife back to her seat, my hand firmly on her shoulder. "Just a little while longer. I promise it'll be worth it." The truth or dare game continued, and with each round more embarrassing details emerged. Her friends were getting progressively drunker and less filtered, sharing intimate details about my wife's teenage years that she'd probably hoped would never see the light of day again. The acne medication that made her skin peel, the time she got caught shoplifting lip gloss and had to call her parents from the security office, the crush she had on their history teacher that everyone knew about except the teacher himself. Each revelation chipped away at her confidence a little more. The woman who had spent years using my intimate life as her personal comedy material was now experiencing what it felt like to have every vulnerable detail of her existence served up for public consumption. "This is what you do to me," I whispered in her ear during a particularly loud round of laughter. "Every single time you open your mouth about our private life." She looked at me with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. For the first time, she was starting to understand that this wasn't just a nostalgic reunion gone wrong. This was payback, and we were just getting started. At 11:30, I decided it was time for the grand finale. I stood up and tapped my glass with a spoon, the classic signal for a toast. The room gradually quieted down as all eyes turned to me. "Ladies, if I could have your attention for a moment," I said, putting on my best loving husband smile. "I'd like to make a toast to my beautiful wife." My wife looked up at me with a mixture of hope and terror. Part of her probably thought this was the moment where I'd rescue her from the evening's humiliation and turn it back into the romantic gesture she believed it was. She was wrong. When I was planning this party, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the room. I wanted to celebrate the woman I married by bringing together the people who knew her during her most formative years. The years that shaped her into the person she is today. Her friends were smiling and nodding, their wine glasses raised in anticipation of a sweet moment. "You see, my wife has this incredible talent," I continued, my tone still warm and loving. "She has the ability to take someone's most vulnerable private moments and turn them into entertainment for others. She's absolutely fearless when it comes to sharing intimate details that most people would consider sacred." A few of her friends exchanged glances. The mood in the room was starting to shift, but they weren't sure why yet. "For example," I said, turning to look directly at my wife, She loves to tell people about our intimate life. Specifically, she enjoys making jokes about my anatomy, in restaurants, at family gatherings, basically anywhere there's an audience for her comedy routine. My wife's face went completely white. "Please don't," she whispered. "Oh, but honey," I said with mock surprise. "I thought you loved sharing personal details for laughs. Isn't that what you do every time you hold up your pinky finger and make jokes about what I'm working with?" The room was dead silent now. Her friends were looking back and forth between us, finally understanding that something much bigger was happening here. "Just last week at dinner with your college friends, you spent 10 minutes comparing me to baby vegetables and making jokes about men with small cars," I continued, my voice still maddeningly calm. "You had the entire table in stitches while I sat there and took it, like I always do." I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. But I wasn't finished. "So tonight I thought it would be fun to flip the script, let you experience what it feels like when someone takes your most embarrassing, vulnerable moments and serves them up for public consumption." I gestured around the room at her friends, who were now looking deeply uncomfortable. "Every story they've shared tonight about your awkward years, your insecurities, your embarrassing moments. That's exactly how I feel every single time you decide to humiliate me for your entertainment." My wife was crying now, tears streaming down her face as the full scope of what I'd done hit her. "You orchestrated this," she said, her voice barely audible. "Just like you orchestrate my humiliation on a regular basis," I replied. "The only difference is that I planned this as a one-time lesson, while you've been doing it to me for years." One of her friends tried to intervene. "Maybe we should all just calm down and talk about this privately." "Oh no," I said, raising my hand. "We're not done with the toast yet, because this is how my wife likes to handle private matters, right out in the open where everyone can enjoy the show." I turned back to my wife, who was now sobbing into her hands. "Tonight, you've experienced what it feels like to have your dignity stripped away piece by piece, to sit helplessly while people laugh at your most vulnerable moments, to want desperately for it to stop but be powerless to control the narrative." I paused, letting that sink in for everyone in the room. "The difference is that everyone here tonight cares about you, and would stop if they knew they were hurting you. When I tell you that your jokes about my intimate life hurt me, you laugh and tell me to lighten up." The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. "So here's to my wife," I said, raising my glass high, "who taught me that humiliation is apparently hilarious, as long as it's happening to someone else." I took a sip of my drink and set it down on the table. "Now, who's ready for dessert? Because I have one final surprise that I think you're really going to enjoy." My wife looked up at me through her tears, and for the first time in our entire relationship, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She was finally beginning to understand that the man she'd been systematically destroying was no longer willing to be her victim. And the night wasn't over yet. I walked over to the side table where I'd placed a sealed envelope earlier that evening. My wife watched me with the kind of horror you see in movies right before the killer reveals themselves. Her friends were frozen in their seats, not sure if they should leave or stay for whatever was about to unfold. "Ladies," I announced, holding up the envelope, "I promised dessert, and I always keep my promises." I walked back to where my wife was sitting and placed the envelope directly in front of her on the table. Her hands were shaking as she stared at it like it might explode. "Go ahead," I said gently. "Open it. This is the grand finale of our little reunion." She looked up at me with pleading eyes. "Please don't do this." "Do what?" I asked with mock innocence. "I thought you loved surprises. Remember how much you enjoyed surprising me and everyone else at that restaurant last week with your little anatomy comedy show?" Her friends were shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. A few of them were whispering to each other, probably trying to figure out if they should intervene or make a graceful exit. When she didn't move to open the envelope, I leaned down and spoke directly into her ear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You have two choices. You can open that envelope yourself with whatever dignity you have left, or I can open it for you and really make this a show. But either way, it's getting open tonight." With trembling fingers, she picked up the envelope and slowly tore it open. Inside were divorce papers, neatly folded and already signed by me. The silence in the room was deafening. "Congratulations," I said, my voice dripping with false celebration. "You're officially free to humiliate whoever you want, whenever you want, without having to worry about my feelings anymore." She stared at the papers like she couldn't process what she was seeing. "I don't understand," she whispered. It's really quite simple, I explained, addressing the room like I was giving a presentation. See, my wife here has spent years treating me like her personal entertainment system. Every intimate detail of our relationship has been fair game for her comedy routine. I began pacing around the room as I talked, making sure to make eye contact with each of her friends. She's told strangers about our sex life. She's made jokes about my body to my family members. She's humiliated me in front of colleagues, neighbors, and apparently anyone else who will listen to her material. My wife was crying harder now, but I wasn't finished. And every time I asked her to stop, every time I told her how much it hurt, she'd tell me I was being too sensitive, that it was just jokes, that I needed to lighten up. I stopped pacing and turned to face her directly. Well, tonight you learned exactly how those jokes feel when you're on the receiving end. The difference is that I only did this to you once, as a lesson. You've been doing it to me for our entire marriage. One of her friends finally spoke up. This seems really extreme. Maybe you two should work this out in counseling or something. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Counseling? You think this is about communication issues? This is about basic human decency, about respect, about understanding that when you love someone, you don't use their vulnerabilities as entertainment for other people. I picked up the divorce papers from where they'd fallen when she dropped them. These papers represent my self-respect, something I should have signed months ago, but I kept hoping she'd realize what she was doing and stop. I looked around the room at her friends, who were all avoiding eye contact. Now, ladies, let this be a lesson. When someone tells you that your jokes are hurting them, maybe listen, because eventually they'll stop laughing along and start planning their exit. My wife was sobbing uncontrollably now, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, no second thoughts, just the clean, clear feeling of finally standing up for myself. The papers are already filed, I continued matter-of-factly. I've moved my important belongings out of the house while you were getting ready for tonight. The bank accounts have been separated, and I've already found a place to stay. She looked up at me with desperate eyes. We can fix this. I'll stop making those jokes. I'll do whatever you want. See, that's the problem right there, I replied. You think this is about what I want. This is about basic human respect, and the fact that you're only willing to offer it now that you're facing consequences tells me everything I need to know. I straightened my jacket and looked around the room one final time. Well, ladies, thank you for coming tonight. I think we can all agree this has been educational for everyone involved. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final comment. Oh, and honey, next time you're tempted to humiliate someone for laughs, remember tonight. Remember how it felt to be completely powerless while everyone around you treated your pain like entertainment. I paused at the door and smiled. Consider it my parting gift to you, and to whoever's unfortunate enough to be your next victim. I walked out of that community center with my head held high, leaving behind a room full of stunned women and one wife who had finally learned that actions have consequences. The best part? I never had to raise my voice, lose my temper, or compromise my dignity. I simply gave her exactly what she'd been giving me, and let the natural consequences speak for themselves. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show someone exactly what they look like in the mirror. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.